Hira, Ali, Hasnain, Assalamu alaikum to you all. Thanks so much, Hira, for joining us. Really appreciate you taking from your time. I've been following some of your wonderful work and your writings, and we're really lucky that you chose to join us today for this conversation. So really, really appreciate it. I've titled the topic of today, Food, Eating Halal, and Muslim American Culture, which I think is a very interesting conversation because, we did an episode, it would be 2 weeks ago now, where we discussed what food says about our identity with Farhan Mohsen, who's a chef. But I think, I think a conversation with you just about, where we fit in this realm of Americanism as told through food, I think is a very interesting conversation to have. So before we get into that, I asked you guys, Ali and Hasnain, this question last time with Farhan. I'm going to ask you guys again. Hira, I'll leave you to last because I feel like you got the best answer. But what is your favorite kind of food? I know you guys answered this last time, but try and give me a different. So, Hasnain, Ali, what's your second favorite kind of food? And I'll ask Hira what's her favorite. Hasnain, you go first.
Damn, I'm always going first. To be honest with you, I've been thinking a lot about that question since the last time, and I don't know why. I don't know why I didn't say pizza. You can't go wrong with New York pizza.
Wow, pizza. Okay,
yeah, you can't go wrong with New York pizza. You can't go wrong with artichoke. You can't go wrong with like Ben's Pizzeria. You can't go wrong with any corner pizza, at least in New York. I don't know why I didn't say that.
I think it's interesting because pizza would have been my last choice, firstly. But for you guys, yeah, but for you guys in New York, it's different because you have this whole New York pizza thing. By the way, I've never had a New York pizza till now. So I'm just throwing that out there for you, Hasnain. Next time.
Had it.
No, next time
No, where did we take you last time you came? Did we eat?
You took me to some Iranian restaurant or something. Yeah, or Tunisian. Yeah, we had kebabs, I think. So yeah, you owe me a pizza for next time. Ali, your turn.
I would say burgers. I love burgers and fries, and especially if it's a really good burger.
That's a good one. To be honest with you, last time I did say that I'll eat anything, but thinking about it now, whenever someone says, "What do you want?" I'm always like leaning mentally toward burgers and fries. So I guess that is my number one pick. Hira, what's your favorite kind of food and why?
That is a difficult question for me to answer, actually, because I feel like it changes based on my mood and what I'm feeling like. I think the general ones that I always go for are tacos, ramen, and
tacos.
Burgers. Yeah. So burgers, fries, shakes, stuff like that. I think it's just like what I'm in the mood for in the moment, and then, or what I can cook at home and what I have, and I'll just make something that, tastes good. So I think I enjoy a lot of food. I enjoy eating in general, and so that's why I've kind of built my career around food so that I can continue eating. But yeah, so I don't have like a one thing, but it's just I'm a moody eater.
I feel like by the end of this podcast, like last time, we're going to be left very, very hungry. So let's try and soldier through it. Hira, I did want to get into like your career and how you like you mentioned you built and are building a career around food. But before that, I want to ask all of you about Ramadan this year. The reason I did that is because I know you wrote an article about celebrating Ramadan and fasting during lockdown. And I did want to speak about it because just like reflecting on it, it was such a monumentous experience for me, at least. So I feel like each of us has our own perspectives to share on this issue. But Hira, starting with you, what was Ramadan like during lockdown? How did it differ to other Ramadans?
So biggest thing is like, you didn't have the dinner parties and the iftars and stuff to go to. Like my family, very Desi family, we go to dawats all the time. We, we'll go to dinner parties and iftars. And so that was a big difference. And then going to the masjid too, like we didn't have that at all. So it was very different, but then it was also nice too, in a way for us, because it allowed us to be closer as a family for the holiday and just really like focus on ourselves. And in terms of food, I think I had fun making food with my mom, and the anticipation was greater because you get to be with your family and stuff like that. And so it was a little bit harder too, because you're just kind of at home and you don't have much distractions and stuff. Whereas I feel like when you go to a dinner party or iftar, it's like you have a collective group that's like, we're ready, we're gonna eat and everything. But yeah, I think it was great as like a familial holiday, rather than just like, going with the community and stuff. So.
What about in terms of spiritually? Because I feel like that's also a very interesting conversation, because we're always in i'tikaf, when people like go to mosques and spend time only in the mosque. Like I feel like that's what we were in, like a forced i'tikaf, all of us, because we were like forced to be at home. So spiritually, how was it for you, fasting and generally just practicing and celebrating Ramadan?
Yeah, I think it was a little harder for me this Ramadan, because for me, going to the masjid was always like a big thing. We go to Tarawih every night, and especially Qiyam nights, like our masjid does like youth groups where we're like staying up all night, right, and doing activities at the masjid, and then we have Qiyam and we eat suhoor together and everything, and that's like a really fun element. And then IHOP suhoors is like big. In Memphis it was big, and so like that was like a big deal, and I wrote about it too at one point, and that was missing, of course. And so I think the disconnect from the community was definitely affected the spiritual side of it a little bit for me, but then in some ways it was kind of a reflection to me on like, this is kind of what I need to work on, and this is where I'm lacking a little bit and I can definitely improve in. But then it's also like with my family, they were good. They had, like, my mom was great at reminding me and just keeping me connected too. But I think it was a little harder for me this time.
Yeah. I mean, I think lockdown generally, I mean, I'll give my perspective in a bit, but I think lockdown generally really changed my whole perspective on everything. I'm obviously, as we know, when it started, it was just so, I'm sure for you guys will agree, it was such a shock, because like, you'd go outside and there was no one, no cars, no people, even pollution in the sky died down over here. So the skies were bluer, and there were more stars at night. And just like that sense of stillness and calmness was definitely forcing me into a place of reflection. So it was definitely a very interesting Shahr Ramadan. Ali, how was your Ramadan under lockdown? Because you guys, by the way, you guys obviously live in New York City, right? I'm sure New York in Ramadan is buzzing. Never sleeps, everything's halal.
Popping.
Yeah, you guys are probably out every single night, having iftar and staying out to suhoor. So how was Ramadan for you guys?
So Ramadan was very different, obviously, because it wasn't the same where we're going to see each other every night at the masjid, or actually NYU is where we would go, Stan and myself and everybody else there. And there's a sense of community that was totally lost. But what we were able to do is actually have some Zoom calls with a bunch of our friends. And
so you guys you guys did Zoom iftars?
Yeah, so we did Zoom iftars,
okay,
and we were able to talk to each other and eat with each other, and then just talk about our days, which kind of worked out well, because otherwise, the first few days, it was just on your own. Wow. And I lived alone, and I was just in my box, and I just would not leave. And even like my groceries, I didn't go out to go get groceries. I would get them delivered. I would wash them, clean them, and then put them in the fridge.
The early coronavirus days when we were all so cautious.
Yeah. So it was very different. But I'm glad there were a group of friends that were able to jump on Zoom calls and talk to each other, and that made it a lot better.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it was definitely so interesting because, like Hira mentioned, I'm sure you guys will agree as well, is that Ramadan is a time where every night you're almost out, right? I mean, the past few years, I've kind of been doing Ramadan at home anyway, but I'm still going out during the day. But especially for the last 10 nights or so, there's this community vibe that, you're always out. You see everyone that you see all these faces. And obviously you get invited as well to so many people's houses during Ramadan for iftars as well. So all that was taken away. And I think also just that kind of being forced to be at home, and even during, for example, Qadr nights, when you're meant to spend the night in worship, I found it challenging to sit at home and pray by myself. It was very hard because usually I'm used to going to the mosque where, everyone's praying together, right? There's that sense of community. And I think for me, lockdown generally really kind of forced me to realign my perspectives on things because, I mean, number one, I'll be honest with you, I absolutely loved lockdown. I know a lot of people have their own opinions on it, but for me, I absolutely loved it because the stillness of it was like almost being on vacation at the beach. You know, you go outside and there's no one in your ears. There's a sense of quietness there. You know, you're almost more in control of your own schedule as well. And that kind of forces you to think, you know, think about what you really value in life, what's important to you, you know. And I think one thing, for example, that kind of came out of that experience for me was, you know, you guys know Ali and Hasnain, you guys know me, and I'm very attached to London. I love being in London. I always ask myself the question, would I be able to live anywhere else? And then I realized, like, hey, during lockdown, what's it, you know, what is where you're living? It's your home, it's your local grocery store, it's you know, the things around you, and you know, you're able to lift it up and take it anywhere else in the world and live there just fine, you know, as long as you have those kind of things around you. So it's not impossible. So it definitely kind of opened my mind, and especially during Ramadan, it really helped me realign myself, I would say, and just give myself a lot of space to breathe and think. So for me, it was definitely a blessing. Hasnain, how was Ramadan for you?
It helped me detach from a lot of things, especially
Right.
a lot of people, which I'm very grateful for.
There's a sub story in there somewhere. I don't want to ask, but you can carry on.
It also helped me focus on my prayer more, you know, because you're alone now.
Right.
And I know you said that being with the community and worshiping together is different, but for me, it's just if I can worship alone in a room to myself, and not constantly look over at Ali to see him doing something while we're praying, like you know, like it was more beautiful for me. All of quarantine, I Uber Eats every single day.
So you spent a lot of money then.
I did. Every day was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You just Uber,
God! Wow.
So I did get to, you know, eat at different spots, even when I could just drive to them. I just decided, I don't want to go anywhere. Like I want them to come to me. So I did get the benefit of that. And Ramadan itself, fasting was a piece of cake this year. I'll be honest with you. Like they're home. So I literally wake up, I turn on my laptop, I go to work from home.
That's the one thing I love about lockdown, by the way. Just waking up and putting your laptop in, and you're now working.
Yeah, so it's just like I send a morning email to let everybody know, like, hey, here, Mr. Ali's here. Okay, fine. Then I just like have like my mouse move around every now and then. I just go about my day. And it was easy because you're home for Ramadan and you could just literally lay down all day or whatnot. And you know, working out was the hardest part because I like to work out as one of my core things that I do on a daily basis. So not having access to a gym, I had to, you know, figure out things for me to do. So I would like jog to the park and do pull-ups at the bar and this, that, and the other. And so it was a lot of good things in a very bad time, I would say, at least for me personally.
Hira, I want to move on to your career as you know, as a food critic, as it were, or just generally having a career in food. You mentioned that, you know, you have a love of food right now. How did that kind of come about? You know, I wouldn't imagine that, you know, or I don't know what your aspirations were growing up, but I wouldn't imagine that Desi parents would reciprocate, you know, their child telling them they want to be a food critic. So how did that come about? You know, were they supportive as well? And just generally following that dream of yours, what kind of you know, what was the first spark that led to this career of yours?
Yeah, so it kind of started when I was really young. I actually really, I recall my parents telling me this, but when I was in kindergarten or something, they like tell you, well, not kindergarten, maybe a little older, but young, they tell you like, what do you want to be and stuff like that. And my parents tell me that I had told them that I wanted to be a mom, a doctor, and a journalist. And so, and it kind of, like all three at the same time, which I don't know how I was going to do that. But I think journalism and storytelling has always been something that I've been very passionate about. I'm a storyteller generally. I'm always the communicator in the family. I'm always telling my stories to everyone. And so I think I always had that interest in that, and I really liked writing. I liked the humanities versus like math and science. I was really bad at it. And so I kind of knew where I was going to go in that. But I think it wasn't until high school, senior year, until I like did a program for journalism that I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I really like the writing form and reporting and what comes with that. With my parents, I think they saw it as a hobby for a while. They knew I wasn't going to do anything as a doctor or, you know, with engineering or anything, because they knew I sucked at math and science. So they were like, there's no chance she's going that direction. So the longest time they were like, oh, she might, you know, do law or something like that. But it wasn't until like college that I really showed them, you know, like this is the career that I want. And I started doing internships, and, you know, they saw the product that I was creating from the work that I was doing and everything. And they were like, okay, this could be a legitimate career. And alhamdulillah, like that was like a great thing, because they were super supportive. I know a lot of families aren't that way sometimes. So I was lucky in that. But I did have to show them like, this is something I'm serious about. It's not a hobby or anything. But getting into food, that kind of came a little later, because I did. So I was looking into like journalism in general. I just wanted to be a reporter, and I looked into politics a little bit, and I was like, that might be interesting to go towards. And I think I graduated in 2016 when Trump was elected. So it was like like a passionate thing, like, okay, I'm going to be a Muslim journalist, and I'm going to be in politics and working, you know, covering that and all. And as college went on, I took classes and different classes in, you know, multimedia storytelling, as well as different kinds of beats, and that included food. And so when I took a food writing class, I was like, I absolutely love this, and I think this is such a great way, because food is honestly a really great way, a really great gateway into talking about so many different topics. Right. It's not just about the food, it's like the people. And that comes with talking about social issues. It comes with talking about what that industry looks like, and what the people are going through. And so I really found that writing style also to be really a lot of fun, because you get to be really creative with it, and then you get to eat food, which is great, because I'm always very hungry. So and I think so I kind of slowly went into audio after doing a lot of multimedia storytelling classes, and that was like the form that I really enjoyed. So that's kind of like how it came to be. But college was very impactful in showing me like what I wanted to do with this career. Yeah, apologies. When I said food critic, I meant food reporter. I didn't mean to change your whole job title. Yeah, a little different. But I mean, I think what's fascinating is, and this is something that kind of is mirrored on each of the guests that we bring onto this podcast, is that whenever I ask them that kind of similar question, which is, you know, what was that first spark that led to you becoming what you are today, they always say, hey, when I was young, I said I wanted to be this. And it's just crazy how, you know, those kind of influences or those kind of dreams that we had when we were young take us to where we are today. I mean, Hasnain Ali and me always talk about this. I mean, even I remember I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. So right now I do videography and editing. That's my like day job, and my passion. And I went to my cousin's house in California, and he had this old VHS tape of me when I was about maybe 10 or 11. And he goes, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a filmmaker. So it's crazy that, you know, this little naive me at that age thinking, you know, he wants to be some sort of Steven Spielberg one day. But that spark and that drive, you know, led to me chasing my passions today. But I think what's so interesting about what you do is that, you know, you said you want to be a journalist, but you also, you know, you've combined essentially two passions, one being journalism and one being food. I want to ask you, and it's a bit of a heavy and weird question, but, you know, you mentioned you graduated in 2016, and obviously post-Trump, and now hopefully we are actually post-Trump, but post-Trump's election, you know, everything changed, let's say, I hope I can say that, for Muslims in America. What do you think that food can do for the narrative of a people or for Muslims? And the reason I ask that is, you know, we talk about Islamophobia in America all the time. What we don't talk about is that, you know, Islamophobes in America still eat halal food. You know, they still go to they still go to curry houses. They still go to places that serve halal food. You know, we spoke in our last episode with Farhan
about how the halal, the culture of halal is synonymous with the culture of New York City, because you have those halal food trucks all over the city, which are giving food to everyone regardless of religion or race. So what can food do to push forward the narrative of a people?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I feel like food is such a great gateway into these like conversations, and it's like an easy way to slip in kind of topics that people might be uncomfortable to like talk about, in terms of like, you know, people who necessarily don't support people of color, but they'll eat the food.
Right.
So I feel like there's ways to talk about these things when like you have a story about a restaurant that those kinds of people frequent, but then you do the story and you cover it in a perspective that talks about the people and the restaurant owners and the food that they're bringing and the issues that they're dealing with as people of color. And that, again, that takes having a reporter who understands that perspective is necessary and needs to go towards that perspective. But if you have that, and that's always kind of been my goal, is to get those perspectives out there. And so food is just like a great way to just talk about these issues that like they don't want to encounter or like come across, but then you just kind of slide it in there and they get to eat it with whatever they're eating. And so I think, and there's a lot of topics I feel like in terms of eating halal too, like there's a lot of cultures that have similar you know, dietary restrictions, and if it's religious or not. And, you know, within the food industry, when you talk about, you know, different kinds of dietary restrictions like veganism and eating kosher and like halal food, I think they're interesting topics that people can relate to, even if they don't follow those restrictions either. It's like, okay, this group is doing this. That's interesting. Why are they doing it? So yeah, I feel like it's just like it's an easy way to talk about this stuff. And there's so many issues within the food industry itself, and talking about those issues are also important, and they can go into a lot of the social issues in general and go into politics and stuff. And I do think that it's like I feel like food is very personal, and so if you can talk about that, I feel like it's a great way to talk about these social issues.
Yeah. I think, I mean, aside from just, you know, talking about food, I mean, I think one thing that you mentioned, you know, having a conversation over a meal is completely different to having a conversation. So, right, so let's say you're having a conversation with, I don't know, a Trump supporter, for example. Having that same conversation over a meal, you know, I feel like you'll have two different conversations, and you know, the idea of breaking bread together is something so entrenched, not just in Islam but in our society. But even in Islam, like it's, I remember reading a hadith that Prophet Ibrahim would walk for like an hour or two to find someone who he can have a meal with, because he because of how much he hated eating alone. I think the reason for that is because having conversations over food really builds connections, and like you said, because it's such a personal thing, it's almost a personal space, right? So when you sit down to have a meal with someone, it's almost like you're sitting down in peace, which I think is really beautiful. I read in one of your articles, you mentioned, you spoke briefly about how you once felt shame over bringing South Asian food to school in your lunchbox. And I found that so interesting because you know, in kind of researching this topic, and again, I keep referring to the last podcast we did, just for a bit of context, like I'm not a guy who thinks about food. I'm not a foodie. Hasnain is definitely a foodie. Ali probably more so than me as well. I'm just the kind of, hey, give me whatever you want and I'll eat it. I'm not really that interested, right? But like thinking more about food and identity and how food represents us. So I mentioned before that, you know, I'm very detached from my Pakistani identity because my parents were born and raised here, and spoke English at home, and you know, I didn't grow up speaking Urdu or Punjabi. But the one thing that was Pakistani about us was the food we ate. So you know, my mom would always cook Pakistani food and dishes, and I kind of realized this, that if it wasn't for that Pakistani food that we had at home, there'd probably be nothing Pakistani about me. I wouldn't be connected to my heritage or identity in any way. Ali's laughing because he makes fun of my distance from my identity and my heritage. But it's true, you know. I feel like there is that deep connection between. It's almost a reflection of your identity. So just like, you know, going into school. and reminiscing over that, how would you say that the food we eat makes us stand out?
I think it makes us stand out a lot because I think even if you talk to people who are, just American and they talk about like what their mom used to make or like the specific kind of recipe she would make to make mashed potatoes or meatloaf or, some like a recipe that's so well known, but it varies between like the family and how the family makes it and stuff. So it's very close to your identity and your upbringing and your childhood, and it's associated with those memories. And people fight over like what's the best way to make pizza based on a city even, and so like it's very much a part of your identity. And in terms of what you were talking about, what I wrote for that article, so basically within that article I was talking about how I was ashamed when I was like going to school, because in the South it's like they're very open about how much they don't like other cultures and stuff like that. And it was definitely like I would enjoy my mom's food and I would enjoy my culture, but I definitely had an identity crisis that I struggled with for a very long time. And it wasn't really until college that I was like, no, I enjoy being Pakistani, Muslim, and American. Like this is my identity. And I brought that into my work as well. And so, I think like I've had to work on my identity just based on like the area that I was in. And I was actually born in Pakistan, and I came over here when I was 1. So I have like no recollection of Pakistan, and I just know the culture based on what my parents have had in the within our household, and then through the food. And like I think the food was my major connection, like for you, and I think the food is what really connected me to my culture. But then it was like a slow process of me like trying to figure out like what does that identity mean to me, and do I want to be do I want to accept my Pakistani identity? And it's still a struggle for me sometimes, but like food has definitely been like such a key player in determining that identity, because it's just it varies for everyone. Everyone's experience with food is very different. People like this food, they don't like this food. And so I think it's a clear reflection, I think, of your identity, what you think about it.
Right. Hasnain, I'll throw this deep philosophical question at you, because I know you love these deep philosophical questions. If we stopped eating Pakistani food, would we still be Pakistani?
Yeah, of course. Look at our fashion. We have amazing fashion. I think Pakistani clothes are phenomenal.
I think what I'm asking more so is, does the food we eat define our identity?
Yeah. Actually, then that's a contradiction. Then I just said.
You just did, yeah.
No, I mean our food is, it's part of our identity, because, I mean, at least here in New York, like there's gonna be some Pakistani restaurants, some Indian restaurants, but they're both lumped into Indian restaurants, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of my friends were like, "Oh yeah, we're going to that Indian restaurant." And then my friends will always jokingly say like, "Oh, you probably have this at home all the time." And I say, "Yeah, I actually do have it at home all the time." You're actually right. So, I'm proud of it. Growing up, it was a little different, because when I was at home and my parents would cook, I would smell like the food, and I would leave the house smelling like the food. And then going to college, I would take food to college because I was a broke college kid. And then all my friends, every single one, they're like, "Yo, can I get a bite? Can I get a bite? Can I get a bite?" To the point where it's just like, it made me appreciate like, hey, like our food has specific spices. It's made a specific way. It's made with passion. It has like Pakistani heritage in it. People like my mom, the way she makes saag might be different than the way your mom makes saag, because you love saag. So so like, yeah, it is part of our identity. But then again, I mean, we have so much more that if you take food away, we have so much more to be passionate.
Right.
We have other things to be passionate about as well.
Right.
That clarifies my contradiction over here.
Ali, same question to you.
I don't think it changes who you are in a way, because just because you don't do one portion of a culture doesn't mean that you're not from that culture.
Right.
Do you listen to, for example, Urdu poetry, or do you watch Pakistani movies, or do you watch Pakistani dramas? By not doing it, does that make you not?
But the thing is, I think food is so much more. Hira mentioned it's personal, but it's also because you're not just consuming it, you're also creating it, right? You're talking about Pakistani.
I'm just consuming it, so
No, you're consuming. I mean, generally, for example, in a Pakistani household, if the Pakistani household were to stop producing Pakistani food, because you can watch Pakistani TV and listen to Pakistani music or poetry or whatever, but to produce it is a whole different ballgame. You see what I'm saying?
If you put it that way, if you put it that way, where families producing it at home and they're eating it at home, yes, I think that would have some sort of an effect on you or on your family and on your upbringing or on the way you smell when you walk out of the house. But
Hira,
but as a general question, for example, someone like me, I don't cook and I eat out like literally every meal. So for me, it doesn't make a difference in that sense.
Fair enough. Hira, I feel like you got a more profound answer to this question. We just been waffling on. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I don't think it like necessarily defines your whole identity. It's like a part of it. And I think that, when you were talking about the thought that came into my mind when you were talking about how, if the Pakistani family, they didn't make the food, like, I feel like, so my mom, she makes like American food too,
right?
But then she'll put in, because like being a Pakistani mom, she'll like put in like desi spices, but she also does recipes. She'll like follow recipes to the T. Like she will, like, especially when it comes to American food, desi recipes, she just like knows it. So she'll just make it. But with American recipes, she really does want to like follow what it is. And so she'll like keep it completely American, or she'll try a Mediterranean dish and she'll, do that. So I think it doesn't necessarily like, it can define. I think the sentence I would use is that it can define your identity. And I just think that like everyone has a very different experience with food, and it's all valid. Like your experience with food is going to be different from the other person, and it adds to your identity. And so if Ali has a very different experience with Pakistani food than I do, it's still going to contribute to his identity in some way, because it makes him who he is in terms of food, but not as a whole also. So
right. I know you mentioned in your own article about food media, and you spoke about how it suffers from racial inequality, and you couldn't find, I guess, representation of yourself or Muslims in food media, so you took to TikTok and kind of like social media instead. So for someone who just like who's coming from the outside and has no idea of the issue, how would you say that food media suffers from racial inequality, and what's the story there?
So I think with food media, like any industry, it suffers with a lot of racial inequalities in terms of not having the correct representation. But specifically with food media, though, is that you have a lot of ethnic foods that are pushed to appease white audiences rather than just showing, this is a Pakistani dish, this is a Bangladeshi dish. Like it's gentrified almost a lot of times to fit that white audience. And so I feel like, and the reason why I wrote that article was essentially to describe like there are other outlets out there, like there's social media amateur chefs who are kind of creating a space for themselves to explore, food and their identity. And I found that representation a lot better than with food media, although food media is making its changes and trying to get better. But just like media in general, it has a very big issue of just not even hiring the correct people to be in those places to say, hey, like that's not like the way we should, go about talking about this dish, or in terms of just journalism and the media in general is like going about a story in a certain way or talking about a group of people in a certain way. They're not hiring them or paying them fairly to be a part of that industry. And so I think that's a big part of the reason why food media is the way it is. And so I kind of talked about that within the article as well. But I just find it like really cool because during quarantine, I was just like on social media, and I just found so many like desi cooks and chefs and bakers, and it was like amazing what they were doing with their accounts. And just they were small accounts, and there were some that were kind of bigger, some that are now doing catering businesses and stuff like that. But it was really fascinating to see that and how they used that medium to create because they when talking to some of those social media accounts, they spoke about how they watch food media and how they learn from food media, but they still don't feel like they're represented.
Right.
And so they've kind of taken it upon themselves to create those recipes and do fusion recipes to kind of talk about their dual identity of being American and Pakistani or Bengali. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And so I wanted to kind of write, like, this is another option out there to what food media is lacking and trying to work on, but lacking still. So
I think what's so interesting in this day and age is that, when people feel they're underrepresented in these, large media corporations, be it TV, film industry, or wherever, they have this incredibly powerful tool called social media, which they can dive into and use as their own representation. And it's really, obviously, for all the faults of social media, it really empowers or gives the opportunity to empower people who feel like they're not represented. So how would you say that social media has changed food media? Because I know, I'm not an expert in food media, but I know that, you mentioned, for example, TikTok, and I've noticed, that it's kind of blown up ever since it started, and the way people have been using it for food is very fascinating. So how would you say it's changed the whole industry?
I think it's, like, again, it created that space for people who are interested in food or just want to share a better perspective of a certain kind of food group, or what their family and their experience with food is. It's a great space for that. And I do want to mention, actually, is that I don't think social media is the replacement or the substitute for food media, because food media and those institutions are established institutions. They have a lot more power. And so there need to be changes within those bigger institutions in order for that whole industry to change. Because that's where a lot of people, even the social media people, are referring to the bigger institutions that exist. But I think social media is that space for people who are so interested in changing things slowly. A lot of social media people that I talk to, his name is Ahmed, and he goes by the Golden Balance on TikTok. And he's gotten very popular, and he's a Muslim living in Detroit, and he's creating food and using TikTok and his platform to change, that space. And he's gotten really big, and he's always wanted to go into the food industry, and this was his way into getting there. So it's a good little little gateway for social media people to get into the food industry, because you do grow a following with social media, so you're able to get more views and get people get a following, essentially. And so which could potentially lead you getting into the industry. But I still think that it's just kind of a space to, like, a separate space aside from the traditional institutions.
Right. How would you say? I know you're diving into the world of food journalism. How would you say you're looking to change the industry from your end?
Yeah. So my goal has always been, ever since I've started journalism, is to add perspectives that weren't there and change. Just because I am a Muslim too, and I've seen how media represents Muslims in general. I think that was a big reason why I went into it. And it has always been my goal to just add that perspective and say, be that person in the newsroom who's like, no, you know what, like, this is the perspective that's actually accurate. Someone who knows the community, or someone who understands to ask the questions to communities, the questions that haven't been answered, because white reporters are not going to know that this is what communities of color go through. And so I, in any opportunity that I've gotten, I always advertise myself as, this is what you're getting. You're getting a Muslim Pakistani woman to join your team, and that is a specific perspective that I'm going to bring. And then I'm also going to try to change things up in your newsroom. I'm going to pitch stories that have a lot to do about the Muslim community, because that's my community. And then a lot of communities of color who are very very underrepresented and misrepresented within the media. And that goes into the food coverage as well. And so anytime I pitch a story, it's also with pitching stories, I try to also make sure that within my stories, the sources I'm going to are diverse, because each community is very diverse. The Muslim community is not one kind of Muslim. It's a lot of different kinds of Muslims. And so it's always important to me to get diverse sources within my own story, and then also pitch diverse stories. And so that's always been my goal, and that's going to continue in whatever beat I go into. And I feel like food is definitely somewhere that's an easy way to get those diverse stories, and an easy thing to pitch as well, I think, because I do think newsrooms want, because people are going to read stories about ethnic restaurants, and they're going to want to know about the Indian place that just opened up. But there's a different perspective that I can put that's like, yes, it's an Indian restaurant, but did you know, like a little bit more into it, and the people, rather than just focusing on, they're just another Indian restaurant. So.
What would you, I mean, was it difficult for you getting into that industry? Is it difficult for you to, I know you said you're starting a new job tomorrow. I don't want to get too personal, but has it been difficult for you to get a job as a Muslim Pakistani? Because I know you talk about how open you are when it comes to changing the newsroom. Like, I wonder if that kind of scares people off, or is more, or they see it as more of an opportunity for them.
I think they see it as an opportunity for them. So, alhamdulillah, I've had not a hard time. Yes. I have had like instances and encounters that have been kind of difficult, but it's not so in terms of getting a job or finding my place within the journalism industry. I think it's because I'm 100% myself when I interview with someone or am talking with other journalists and the newsroom, and I really do just brand myself as a Muslim journalist, and this is what you're gonna get this, and you need this. And I try to sell myself in the fact that, you guys are looking for diversity. You say you want to change. This is your opportunity to change. And so, I mean, that's also kind of come with later on as I like continue within the industry. I'm sure I'm gonna hit roadblocks, but at the moment I haven't hit as many roadblocks, and I am early in my career, so I feel like there are more seasoned Muslim journalists that have probably had a harder time, and because I do think they're the ones who paved the way for Muslim journalists like me who are just starting out to go further within that career. So
I want to move on to your podcast. I think because it has a very interesting kind of like, I guess, vision statement when you talk about how this podcast is about what it means to be a Muslim American through the universal search for good food. But before I ask you this, I want to bring in Hasnain before he checks out completely. Where Hasnain, sorry, so just a bit of context. Hasnain is actually quite ill right now. You got a fever, right, Hasnain?
I have a fever, yes.
Yeah, it's not coronavirus. He tested negative, but
yes.
You're
Alhamdulillah.
You said you like 110 degrees, or what was it?
It was 124.
Okay, are you feeling better since you had that tea, or?
Yeah, I actually do feel better.
Okay, cool.
Wow, I want to applaud you for doing this interview.
No, it's okay. I wanted to be here.
But I mean, why I want to ask you, Hasnain, because you're a big foodie. You love going out, you love exploring, you love eating. You eat at Nusrat, we know before you gloat about it. But you generally love, I'm guessing, exploring restaurants and exploring different spots in NYC. How do you like, I guess, tying in with the theme of Hira's podcast, and she'll tell us more about it and tell me if I'm wrong when I talk about what it's about. But how do you kind of explore your own Muslim American identity when it comes to going to different spots? Very heavy question.
Damn, what the heavy questions all the damn time?
I feel like the heaviest questions give the best answers.
So how do what was the question? I don't even know.
Explore your Muslim American identity going to these different spots.
Well, I mean, like, for example, where Ali's old apartment used to be, there was a Pakistani store right across the street. And when I entered there for the first time, it felt really homey. because it had like that
aura. I know what you mean. Yeah.
It had like that dirty table. It had like that greasy, yummy food. Like the guy behind me and him locked eyes, and he knew off the bat. And it's like very welcoming. So like, you know, it's like for me, like when I go to a specific restaurant of a specific like Thai or whatever it is, I go in with a sense of respect of that culture and of that food, right? For example, like, you know, going to like a Japanese restaurant, there's an etiquette to it. Going to a French restaurant, there's an etiquette to it. And I'm slowly learning that over time. You know, my time when I went to France, I was Googling all this stuff, and like it was telling me like there's a specific etiquette going into a French restaurant. With the Pakistani restaurant, I don't know if there's any etiquette. I just walk in, I order whatever I want. It's amazing. So I think exploring my identity when going to like a restaurant is just feeling home, knowing that I've had this before. This is probably better because it's made with the more ingredients that we would have at home, right? Or it's made in bulks, or it's made with a different style because they're from a different part of Pakistan that might make it differently.
Right.
So that's kind of how I explore it.
I think that's so interesting because it reminds me of, I don't know if you remember, when I was staying in New York that week, I was going to Steinway to this, and I said, "Hey guys, have you checked out this place?" And it was a very grimy, gringy fast food chicken shop. I forgot what it was called, but I was like, "This place is amazing! I can't believe it! I love it!" So, what was it called? Sorry.
Cubbies. It's right there on the corner.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, I loved it, and I was like, because for me, it reminds me of these grimy chicken shops back home. You know, when you want to go into like a dirty corner shop and get yourself spend £3 on a fried chicken and fries. And I think that's what's so interesting. Is like, you know, I hope I'm not exaggerating here, but when you step into, you know, a Pakistani store or a Japanese store or a Turkish store, a restaurant, sorry, it's like you're stepping into their country. It's like you're stepping into the Turkish embassy, not even the Turkish restaurant, right? Where everything inside there is Turkish. So Hira, I did want to ask you about this podcast because I just felt like it was so interesting. And frankly, you know, when I came across it, I knew we had to get you on. But what's the story behind this podcast, and what kind of conversations did you have?
Yeah, so this podcast actually started as a class assignment for a podcasting class that I took in college, and this was junior year, and this was right after the food writing class that I took, and I was kind of discussing ideas for it because I knew I was going to take the class next semester with my professor, and we were just talking about how he wanted to order barbecue for the last day of class and I was like, well, you can't order barbecue. I eat halal. Like, I won't be able to eat it. And he was like, well, are there any places? And I was like, yeah, like there's only one. You can, like in Memphis, there's literally only one halal barbecue place, and Memphis is the barbecue place, and pork barbecue specifically. And so he was like, okay, I'll order it from there. So he ended up ordering there, and that's where I kind of got the idea of doing a podcast about what it means to be Muslim, specifically in the South, just because that's my experience, and how food plays into that, and how my identity also plays into that. So when I go out to eat, like finding a halal restaurant, when I travel even, is like so exciting because of living in Memphis where there's very few halal, like good halal restaurants that aren't just you know, Mediterranean or Desi restaurants. And so that was kind of the basis of that idea for that podcast. And so within the class, we kind of had to, our goal in the class was to create a plan for the podcast, a pitch for it, and a pilot episode.
Right.
And so doing that, when we were partnered up with a classmate, and so my friend partnered up with me, and she is Palestinian Muslim. She's a vegetarian, actually. So it kind of, it's not halal eating, but like she like understands not eating meat to some extent, and so she kind of brought her own perspective to the podcast as well, and so like the semester ended, the class ended, and we were just like, you know what, this would be really cool to just continue, because we haven't explored more of like what Memphis has to offer in terms of halal food, and so and also with the podcast, it wasn't just about going towards halal restaurants, it was also interviewing people within the Muslim community who were doing like really big things. So the first person we had on was a nonprofit director, and he created essentially a youth group nonprofit for Muslims in Memphis, young Muslims in Memphis. And so we had him on as a guest, and then we would go to the restaurant, eat together, and we would talk to the restaurant owner as well. And so it was just kind of this whole exploration into what Muslim American culture is, and how food plays a part into that in terms of halal eating. And also exploring, it was also to explore, you know, like not everyone eats halal, not every Muslim eats halal, and to kind of explain the, you know, the rulings behind that, but then also like what that experience for people who don't eat halal is also, and the experience that exists for people who do eat halal, like myself. And so we just continued it, and we did like 5 episodes. We also continued it just because we are journalism students, and this was like a great way to explore and build on our skill set. And I'm very much into audio, so this was just like a really great summer of like learning myself. And so, and I did go I ended up going to an internship in between us producing, and I was able to talk to people in Rochester, because that's where I was, Rochester, New York, and get their experience as well. So it was like kind of an addition to the Memphis scene that we were doing. One of my favorite episodes, though, is one we did on Ramadan. So the reason why Ramadan was kind of like not as great this year is because when we did last Ramadan, it was really great because we got to do the episode, and we got to go to different iftars and kind of really show this picture of what Ramadan means to Muslims and how food plays such a big role in Ramadan. Even though we're fasting for so long and food is not something we're thinking about it, but generally people, non-Muslims, don't think we think about food during Ramadan, but we like really do, and it's such a big part of Ramadan. So we were able to capture that, and that was just like a fun thing to do as well. So it was an awesome experience to do a podcast like that, and just like really great to learn you know, about podcasting in general, because that's something I'm looking to go into.
Wonderful.
So let me ask you this really quickly, because you're born and raised in Memphis, correct?
No, I was born in Boston.
Oh yes, sorry. Excuse my fever, please. And you said that in Memphis there was one halal restaurant. So I'm assuming when you would travel, you get really excited because you have more options open up.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that New York has the best halal food?
I've only been to New York once, and that was 3 days that I went there. But Rochester, New York is like upstate New York, and they had good halal food. Their main dish is the garbage plate. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but
sounds appetizing.
It was all right. It wasn't like the most appetizing thing I've had, but it is this combination of they do beef patties, and they put it's just like I'm trying to remember all the ingredients, but they put like potatoes on there, and they put ground beef, like a ground beef sauce on top of that, and then like they have diced onions, and then they put ketchup and mustard on that. It's literally like meat and potatoes and like starch, meat, everything in a plate, and it's like in a styrofoam little box, and you just like have to eat the whole thing.
Oh my God.
And so that's another story that I actually had done up there. For my internship, and then for the podcast as well, is there are only 2 places in Rochester that have a halal garbage plate, and that is like the city's staple food, just like barbecue is for Memphis.
Yeah,
I know it's a weird staple food for them to have, but that's what they have. And so so I just did an episode on that, and it was really cool to see the reaction of the community, because and just talking to them about it, having the staple dish be halal is so important to the Muslim community. That representation was a really big deal. And so it was a very clear example, like, you know, food is so important to the Muslim community, and having that representation like was great. And so so yeah, I mean the food was good, but I think that specific dish was like, okay.
I mean, I think we see that I mean it's so I mean, it's everywhere now, but even like in burgers, right? Having halal burgers essentially being an American dish, and having it so accessible now, and being able to go anywhere and have a halal burger, I guess shows we're taking over. I want to say Sharia coming to the country, maybe, I don't know. But I will also add that the best halal food in America, being someone who's traveled, is definitely in Dearborn, Michigan, without a doubt. Just not to upset you, Hasnain, but I'd say New York is maybe second or third after Dearborn. I mean, there's nothing else in Dearborn, but there's good food, so we'll give them that. Just kind of like winding down before we conclude. Hira, I know you talk a lot about halal in your articles, and I asked this question to the guys in the episode we did with Farhan. So I wanted to get your thoughts on it. What does halal mean to you? And I don't just mean like the obvious connotations behind that word, which is how an animal is killed and what we eat, but also like as a culture, as an identity, as Muslim representation. What does halal mean to you?
So I think it's a connection to just what I've learned from my family, and so eating halal and was definitely something that my mom was big on, and so she just kept it as something that we should do, and I just kept to it because that's what I knew, and I have. So although sometimes I do want to break for a Chick-fil-A sandwich, but yeah. So I think halal is just, I think, that connection to Islam too, not only my family, but it's definitely a connection to Islam that I'm in a way following kind of some of the rulings that are there, and I feel like it's a connection to my Islam. I haven't actually thought about that much, what it means to me, so I'm trying to think of a good.
No, I think that's definitely a beautiful answer. I mean, I certainly haven't thought of it that way myself. I think even if you're in the most distant part of the world, and no one around you is Muslim, you'll always be looking for something halal to eat, right? So that is your connection with your faith. Before we end, Ali, you've been very quiet this episode, so I want you to give us a line of wisdom. I know you're very hungry right now. You mentioned on the WhatsApp group, but just a line of wisdom before we go, because every episode you drop these one-liners, so I need a line of wisdom to.
Not when you put me on the spot. Then I have to think through a lot of different ones. I don't know. Based on what? What do you want to know?
Your perspective on halal food.
I think it's very important because, as we spoke about before, and people say you are what you eat. So if you eat clean and you eat what's permitted, that essentially what it'll do is it'll help you be more spiritual, in my opinion, because if we end up doing things that block off our spirituality, then we can't rise ourselves to the highest level as far as getting closeness to God. And that's why it's very important for me personally to make sure that whatever I eat is clean and halal and is done the right way as God has asked.
Hasnain, one line, but you just took me from here to the heavens. I don't know how you did it. It's beautiful. But yeah, I mean, I think just kind of closing off, I mean, that is an interesting way to look at it. And I think sometimes we can get caught up on, when it comes to halal, it's the way it affects your body and your spirituality and your insides. But I think even on the most simplistic level, it's a bit of discipline. Right, it's just that discipline that we have, that we can't just grab meat from the local shop. We have to go 20 minutes down the road and get the halal version instead. So I think that's what's
I think that for me, halal, and I have a better answer now. But I think that eating halal for me is my visible way of representing that I'm Muslim and I'm following that discipline. And especially as someone who's working as a food journalist, right. That is a visible representation that, I'm Muslim and this is what I do and this is our culture and this is how it works. Not everyone does it, but I do it, and this is my perspective that I'm giving you. I'm doing that. So
beautiful. Thank you so much. I just want to take this moment, Hira, to appreciate you. If anyone wants to reach out to you or follow your journey, where can they find you on social media?
Instagram and Twitter.
Nice. And your Twitter handles? Just
handle is kind of weird. I never changed it from when I created it, when I was never using it, and then I feel like people have tagged me for articles and stuff, so I'm scared to change it, but it's at Hira Qureshi 7.
Nice.
And then,
there's a hidden meaning there somewhere.
And then my Instagram is at it's Hira Qureshi.
Nice. And where can people find your podcast?
So at Eating Z Pod on Instagram and Twitter as well.
Wonderful. Hira, thank you so much. Inshallah, we'll see you again soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.